All right, let's take you back to this now. The ANC has 5 days to hand over its deployment committee records to the Democratic Alliance. This is after the High Court in Johannesburg dismissed its application for leave to appeal an earlier ruling. Well, let's get into the nuts and bolts of what this decision, this court decision, means for the Democratic Alliance. John Steenhuisen is the leader of that party. He joins me now. John, good morning to you. Thank you for your time. So the ANC has 5 days to hand over these records to you. If that is not complied with, the 5 days, what's your next step? But I suppose more importantly, what will you do with the records once you receive them?
Yeah, thanks, Polly. Obviously, if the ANC refuses to comply with the court order, we will have to go and get an order to compel and get those documents, much like the fight we had for the spy tapes. Hopefully it won't be a long case, but now that the court has ordered that we are entitled to those. The documents are very, very important because they will cover the period where now President Cyril Ramaphosa was the chairperson of the cadre deployment committee. And he's spoken a lot about the 9 wasted years under Jacob Zuma, and has airbrushed his own role in those 9 wasted years, where he was the chairman of the cadre deployment committee. So it's going to be very interesting to see those minutes, to see Mr. Ramaphosa's hand in some of the appointments at state-owned entities, in the judiciary, in key government departments and others, to be able to understand the mechanics of how state capture unfolded, which was enabled entirely through the process of cadre deployment. We would not have had state capture had cadre deployment not provided the conduit for that, for those individuals to be appointed into the positions where they could facilitate the capture of the state.
Yeah. John, let me crystallize my question around what are you going to do with these documents? And I'll crystallize it in this way. Remember the spy tape saga. You went to court, ultimately you received those records. That essentially revived the very case that former President Jacob Zuma now faces in court around the arms deal. In this particular instance, would we see you going to court with what you perhaps might call, knowing the Democratic Alliance and the language you choose to employ at times, to say this is the smoking gun, that Cyril Ramaphosa was indeed complicit in state capture, and therefore these are the possible charges?
Well, you may recall the main thrust of this case is to have cadre deployment declared unconstitutional and unlawful, and we are awaiting judgment on that. Already, the minutes that we were able to receive prior to these ones had allowed us to be able to make a compelling that cadre deployment is contrary to both the Constitution but also contrary to the Public Service Act, and that it needs to be declared by the court to be unconstitutional. The main thrust here is to cut off this process of cadre deployment from ever happening again, regardless of whatever party is in charge of government, to ensure that we are able to build a capable civil service that's able to deliver services for the people and be beholden to a sense of public duty rather than a party political duty. So that is the main thrust of the case. But I do think that the president has airbrushed his role as Mr. Zuma's deputy president and as chairman of the cadre deployment committee, and that many of the ills that he is now says he's ostensibly tackling in state-owned entities could well have been manufactured by appointments, and I'm as deputy president and chair of this committee.
Yeah, John, unfortunately we keep losing you, so I'm going to try and quicken the conversation. The Justice Minister, and I choose him deliberately because there is the person who holds perhaps one of the most important portfolios in government. Ronald Lamola stood up in Parliament and said, cadre deployment is not going to be done away with. And so you are probably going to face yet more legal challenges before this can go anywhere. your thoughts around this massive hurdle. If perhaps you think I'm making a mountain out of a molehill, then please make it clear to me.
Yeah, not at all, Claudia. I think it's a very good question. And the reality is it's not going to be up to Mr. Lamola. It'll be up to the courts to decide whether this is unconstitutional and lawful. And that would be the final arbiter in the matter. The Justice Minister's opinion on cadre deployment is neither here nor there. If the court declares it unconstitutional and unlawful and ultra vires of the Public Service Act and the Constitution, then government's got no choice but to abandon it. And that is the ultimate goal of what we're trying to achieve, is to try and get cadre deployment rooted out so that we can firewall the state from ever falling subject to state capture again, because it was cadre deployment that opened the door for state capture to take place.
Yeah.
And that is the ultimate goal. And it's going to not come down to my opinion or the Justice Minister's opinion. It's going to come down to a court ruling and court judgment, which is then going to be a finite resolution on the matter. And we are hoping, will ultimately end the practice so that we can build a capable civil service that's working for the people and not for politicians.
Well, John, these efforts can well be pointed back at you to say, yes, you accuse the ANC of practicing cadre deployment, but the Democratic Alliance practices exactly the same thing. It may not be worded as such, and some people may even point to instances in the city of Johannesburg where some people within the administration were now suddenly being kicked out because that city was being run by a DA-led coalition government. How do you answer those questions where you are accused of practicing the very same thing that you are fighting against the ANC?
Well, as I've said to everybody, if you can point to me an instance, I'd be very grateful to know it. And we must separate between what is cadre deployment into the public service and legitimate appointments of people into the offices of political office bearers. And there is a key distinction there. Political office bearers have a finite term that is linked to their term of office. And every single political staff around the world, whether you're the mayor of New York, the president of the United States, or the president of the Republic of South Africa, or the mayor of Joburg, is entitled to a certain number of political appointments into their office. But those people lose their jobs the moment the political office bearer loses their jobs.
Yeah.
What we're talking about here is the civil service, the permanent civil service of a city, the permanent civil service of a government department, and the permanent appointments in particular state-owned entities. And that is where cadre deployment has wreaked its most egregious havoc.
Yeah.
So I encourage any individual who has evidence of DA cadre deployment to please point it out, because I'm very grateful to see it. But you've got to make the distinction between political appointments and cadre deployment, and the two are very, very different.
All right, John, I've completely run out of time, but it would be remiss of me not to ask you of the events which unfolded yesterday, the public protector tabling what she says is evidence of extortion that was sought against her by 3 ANC members of parliament, including the person that's leading the inquiry into her fitness to hold office. How do you view what occurred yesterday there?
Well, these are very serious allegations, and for a public protector to making these allegations, I think that she must provide the evidence, and that evidence must be tested. And if indeed it is the case, there must be consequences for those who are involved. The individuals all involved have vehemently denied that the extortion took place. We know that the public protector has a background in the State Security Agency. We know that the public protector is fighting for her pension and political life at the moment, and would say and do anything to preserve that. So like any allegations, they must be taken seriously, but these must be tested against an investigation. And if they are found to be true, well, there must be consequences for those individuals. If they're found to be baseless, well, I think it's just another example why Ms. Mkhwebane is completely unsuitable to be the public protector of the country. And I think it would strengthen the impeachment committee's case quite substantially.
When you say she has a history in the state security arrangement, what does that mean in clear words?
Well, we know that she has a history of working for the State Security Agency, and it came out and it's emerged recently, and that she was working for them, and we've maintained that right from the beginning.
Are you saying that
that is her background?
You're saying that this should be viewed with suspicion because, as the Democratic Alliance has always held it, that she's a spy. Are you saying that these are the workings of a spy?
Well, I would say that if one looks at the sorry track record of the State Security Agency and what happened under Arthur Fraser, what's happened under previous State Security Agency heads, the issuing of firearms to private citizens and ministers, the money that was being paid to so-called informers who were actually sitting public office bearers, nothing is beyond the imagination and beyond the realm of the possible from within the tactics of the State Security Agency. And that's why I'm saying that these things need to be tested very, very carefully in order to ensure that they are in fact true.
John Steenhuisen, leader of the Democratic Alliance, let me thank you very much for your time.